The city of Oakhaven was a cathedral of steel and indifference, where Silas spent his days watching the world move at a pace he could no longer match. He had become invisible to the thousands of commuters who flooded the square each morning, a fixture of the landscape as permanent and ignored as a cracked paving stone. Then came a Tuesday morning that smelled of ozone and damp earth, and with it, a woman whose presence seemed to sharpen the very air around her. She stopped directly in front of him, her shadow falling across his boots, and spoke with a voice like fine parchment. She said, "You look like a man who is waiting for something to happen, so perhaps you should start it." She reached into her pocket and produced a single, crisp $5 bill, extending it with a gloved hand. As he took it, she whispered, "Do not spend it, Silas. You must grow it." Before he could ask a single question, she was gone, leaving him with a piece of paper that felt heavier than any gold he had ever imagined. His stomach growled with the familiar ache of hunger, but her words echoed in his mind with a strange authority that he found impossible to ignore. Silas was a practical man, but isolation had made his thoughts turn in curious directions, and he began to wonder if the woman had meant her words literally. The next morning, he found a discarded ceramic pot behind a florist's shop, still filled with dark, nutrient-rich soil that smelled of life and potential. He carefully folded the $5 bill into a small square and tucked it deep into the dirt. He patted the soil down and whispered, "Grow then, if that is what you were meant to do." For the first time in years, Silas had a responsibility, a strange and fragile anchor that required his attention and his presence. Days turned into a week, and though the bill remained buried in the dark, something in Silas began to shift as he tended to his peculiar garden. To keep the pot safe, he had to stay in the same place, and to stay in the same place, he had to clean up the small corner of the park he called home. Passers-by noticed the man with the pot and the clean bench, and their averted eyes began to linger, curious about the strange care he took with his meager possessions. A young gardener stopped one afternoon, looking at the barren soil in the pot, and he asked Silas, "What are you growing in there, old man?" Silas replied with a small smile, "I am growing a future." The gardener laughed and handed Silas a small packet of real seeds, saying that every future needs a little bit of green to help it along. Silas planted the marigolds alongside the hidden $5, and as the flowers began to sprout, his own internal psychology began to bloom with them. He realized that the value of the money was no longer in what it could buy, but in the effort he had spent protecting its potential. This is known as the endowment effect, where we value things more simply because we own them and have invested ourselves into their survival. Silas began to trade small tasks for better soil, for water, and eventually for a small hand trowel, each transaction a brick in his new foundation. The shop owner watched him work and said, "You have a steady hand, Silas, and more patience than most men half your age." He offered Silas a part-time job tending the nursery in the back, a position that came with a small wage and a dry place to sleep. Silas agreed, but he insisted on bringing his teal pot with him, the hidden $5 still resting beneath the now vibrant orange marigolds. As his bank account grew from 0 to 10, then to 50, and then to hundreds, Silas never once felt the urge to spend the original $5. He was experiencing the power of momentum, where the psychological cost of breaking a positive streak becomes greater than the reward of a fleeting pleasure. The literal growth of his plant had become a mirror for his own life, a visible tally of the days he had chosen discipline over despair. One day, a storm lashed Oakhaven with such fury that the nursery's glass roof groaned under the weight of the wind and the hail. Silas spent the entire night moving the most delicate saplings to safety, his old field jacket soaked through as he fought to protect the life under his care. When the morning sun finally broke through the clouds, the owner looked at the saved nursery and said, "Silas, you have more than earned your place here, and I want you to manage the whole shop." Silas stood among the flowers, a man who had once been invisible, now a vital part of a thriving community. And he felt a strange pull to return to where it all began. He took the teal pot, its marigolds now thick and heavy with blossoms, and walked back to the rain-slicked city square where Blythe had first found him. He sat on the same wooden bench, the pot resting beside him, and he waited with a patience that was no longer born of desperation, but of fulfillment. As if summoned by his very thought, the woman with the silver bob and the violet eyes appeared from the crowd, her tailored charcoal coat as sharp as ever. She looked at the flowers, then at the man in the clean sweater, and she smiled a secret smile. She said, "I see you took my advice quite literally, Silas. But tell me, what have you truly grown?" Silas reached into the soil and pulled out the original $5 bill, which was now stained with earth and worn thin. He held it out to her and said, "I grew a life that is worth more than the paper it was printed on." Blythe did not take the money, but instead placed her gloved hand over his, her violet eyes twinkling with a profound and ancient wisdom. She whispered to him, "Then the seed has served its purpose, and you must now pass it on to someone else who is waiting for something to happen." She turned and vanished back into the river of people, leaving Silas alone once more. But this time, he was a man with a legacy to distribute. He looked across the square and saw a young woman sitting on a cardboard box, her eyes hollow and her spirit flagging in the encroaching evening chill. Silas walked over and placed the teal pot and the earthy $5 bill in her lap. He leaned down and said with a gentle warmth, "Don't spend it, my dear. You must grow it." The secret of change is not found in the magnitude of the start, but in the relentless protection of the direction you have chosen. When we treat our small decisions as seeds, we stop looking for quick harvests and start building the soil that will support a forest. Silas walked away, his heart light and his hands empty, knowing that the most valuable thing he ever owned was the decision to wait for the bloom. For in the end, it was never really about the $5. It was about the man who was brave enough to believe that a piece of paper could grow roots.